She stepped off the plane, hands trembling, heart full of hope, but his face turned cold, like he was staring at a stranger. The smile disappeared, and then came the words that cut like a knife. "I can't be with someone who looks like my mother." She thought she'd finally found love, but what happened next will change everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The hotel room smelled faintly of citrus and bleach, as though the air were trying to scrub away the memory of what had just happened. Miranda sat on the edge of the bed, one hand still gripping the strap of her handbag like it might anchor her to something solid. Outside, Miami's sun blazed with casual cruelty, golden and oblivious. Inside, the silence screamed. She hadn't cried, not yet. The hurt wasn't raw enough to bleed. It had settled like wet concrete in her chest, heavy and inescapable. There had been no argument, no dramatic farewell, just that withering look and a few curt words that clung to her like mildew. "You look like my mother." That was the sentence that killed the fantasy. What cut deepest wasn't the rejection. It was the pretense. The weeks of messages, late-night calls, playful exchanges that felt like a balm to her weary soul. Eric had leaned into her vulnerabilities, complimented the very parts of herself she'd been told were undesirable. Her empathy, her patience, the quiet way she paid attention. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seemed to see more than what time had etched into her skin. But it had all been a mirage. The moment her physical reality confronted his expectations, the illusion shattered. She saw it the instant he took that half-step back at the airport. The man who had once told her she had eyes like someone who'd lived through storms and still offered shelter, now couldn't meet them without flinching. She'd worn her best dress, navy blue, soft fabric that hugged her gently. She'd even put on the pearl earrings her mother gave her at 30, saying, "These will remind you who you are when someone tries to make you forget." At the time, it sounded poetic. Tonight, it sounded prophetic. Miranda set the earrings on the nightstand like two little bones, hollow, gleaming, useless. She opened her phone out of habit and stared at the blank chat screen. No response. No explanation. Just digital abandonment. It wasn't rage she felt. Rage would have at least implied she had power. What she felt was quieter, more insidious. Shame. Like she'd been foolish for hoping. Like her very longing had been offensive. She stood slowly, walked to the mirror above the desk and looked at herself, not with cruelty, but with stunned detachment. This was her, 42, lined but luminous, bruised but not broken. She touched the glass lightly. "Next time," she whispered. "I won't apologize for being real." The bus rattled like an old breath wheezing its way north, the windows coated in dust and late sunlight. Miranda sat near the back, hunched against the glass, her fingers absently tracing the fog from her breath into invisible shapes. Her suitcase was jammed into the seat beside her, still zipped tight, like her heart, wrapped up and sealed from the world she no longer trusted. The vinyl seat beneath her stuck to her skin, but she barely noticed. Her body was here. Her spirit still wandered somewhere behind a hotel curtain in Miami. She had stared at that curtain for hours, as if it held answers, as if it might shift slightly and offer a different version of events. One where Eric smiled, one where he said something kind. But the reality hadn't budged. The words he said were carved into her memory now, sharp, shallow wounds that bled each time she blinked. "I can't be with someone who looks like my mother. Not, you're not what I expected. Not even, I'm sorry. Just rejection, clean and surgical. No anesthesia." The deeper hurt, though, wasn't his dismissal. It was the affirmation of a fear she'd fought for years. That her worth had an expiration date. that after a certain point, a woman could be beautiful, brilliant, nurturing, and still invisible. She'd thought love was about timing, about honesty. But Heartbound, with its glossy promises and empty matches, had exposed a different truth. Love, for women like her, was something people measured in miles and years, not in kindness, not in soul. Miranda closed the app that night like slamming shut a book she no longer wanted to finish. She hovered over the delete button, thumb trembling. When she pressed it, a strange silence followed. Not relief, not freedom, just emptiness. An online grave for another dead dream. The bus jolted over a pothole. Her phone buzzed. She stared at it for a long moment. Her mind still teetered in that fragile state between numbness and ache, where every word felt like it could either mend or shatter. The message was simple, almost uncertain. I know what it's like to feel forgotten. No emojis, no filters, just honesty, quiet and bare. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She was done with all this, wasn't she? But something in that message felt familiar. Not in content, in tone. It wasn't about wanting her. It was about recognizing her. And recognition, when you've been invisible for too long, can feel like mercy. She replied, not with hope, not yet, but with something else. A flicker. A whisper. What if not everyone looks away? The knock on her door came just after noon, gentle but firm, the kind of knock that didn't demand but asked. Miranda stood frozen in the foyer, hands curled nervously around the hem of her sweater. The door felt heavier than it should, like it guarded not just her home, but the vulnerable remnants of her hope. She opened it. Jack stood there, not like a man arriving to be impressed, but like one returning to a place he'd long wanted to find. He wore a forest green jacket, one hand clutching a slightly crumpled bouquet of daisies and wildflowers, the kind you don't order, but choose. His hair had streaks of gray at the temples, and his eyes, a deep slate blue, held no trace of appraisal, only warmth and something that looked like relief. I almost forgot to breathe, he said with a quiet smile. She expected awkwardness, expected him to look past her, to search her features for signs of wear or compromise. But Jack didn't scan or compare. He looked into. And when he stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug, gently, with trembling reverence, it didn't feel like a test passed. It felt like a reunion. The weekend unfolded not in fireworks, but in flickering lamps and soft-spoken kindness. Jack asked about her garden, even though it was half dead from frost. He laughed, not out of politeness, but because her sarcasm caught him genuinely off guard. When he sat beside her mother and listened to her stories, half memory, half invention, he didn't glance at his watch once. He tightened a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen with nothing more than a pocket screwdriver and a smile. And when Miranda said, "You didn't have to," he simply said, "I wanted to." They walked the wooded trail behind the library where she worked, the one blanketed in rust-colored leaves. Miranda pointed out her favorite trees, the one that always turned early, the crooked one kids called the witch, and Jack listened like each detail mattered. When she tripped slightly on a root, he didn't reach for her hand out of reflex. He waited, and when she extended hers first, he held it like something sacred. That night, they sat on the porch sipping tea in mismatched mugs. A quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but rich with everything unspoken. "I don't want perfect," Jack said softly, as if afraid of breaking the moment. "I want real. I want you." Miranda looked at him then, her breath caught between fear and something deeper. Not passion, not certainty, peace. The wedding was quiet, intimate, not because they wanted it small, but because it was enough. The garden behind her mother's house had long since become wild, half-forgotten under tangled ivy and old bird baths crusted with moss. But Jack cleared the overgrowth himself, one shovel at a time, until a patch of soft earth and tulips emerged. Miranda had picked a simple dress with sleeves that brushed her wrists and a neckline that reminded her of grace more than glamour. Her mother sat in a folding chair beneath the maple tree, clutching a handkerchief as though it held together more than tears. When Miranda said her vows, her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. Every word had lived inside her for years, buried beneath layers of silence and doubt. Jack held her hand as if it were already part of him. Later, when the sun began to dip behind the chimney and laughter faded into the rustle of leaves, they stayed in the garden, alone. Miranda looked at Jack and felt no need to ask if this was real. It was. Months passed, not with haste, but with deliberate rhythm, like the ticking of a metronome that held the tempo of healing. Jack moved in without disruption, blending into her life the way water fills the cracks in a riverbed. He brought warmth without noise, laughter without demand. Miranda reduced her hours at the library and dusted off the folder labeled Foster Certification. It had sat untouched for almost 10 years, yellowed but waiting. When the girls arrived, Lena and Sophie, they came like a storm, not loud but heavy with need. Lena rarely spoke, and Sophie hoarded crackers under her pillow. Jack never flinched. Miranda, who had once feared she was too soft for motherhood, discovered a fierce kind of strength in small gestures, brushing tangled hair, whispering bedtime stories, showing up every single day. One night after Sophie had finally fallen asleep without the light on, and Lena had asked to hold Miranda's hand for the first time, Jack turned to her under the porch light and said, "I used to think broken people needed fixing, but some are just waiting for someone to see their worth." Miranda didn't speak, and in that moment, everything that had once hurt, every rejection, every silence, every shameful glance in a mirror, became something else entirely. Not erased, transformed. Because when Jack looked at her, it was never as a man settling. It was as a man honoring. And for the first time, Miranda knew, she hadn't been chosen because she was convenient or young or easy to love. She had been chosen because she was worth it.